Hello, everyone. My name is Baye. I work for the State Association and am graciously co-presenting this with WACD's lobbyist, Brady. And the goal is to kind of share with you how to be a little bit more effective with interacting with your legislators, how to meet with them efficiently, understand the legislative process, what they can do for you, and try to demystify what WACD does, what some conservation districts are able to do effectively, and take 25 years of experience and give you something to walk away with. So hopefully that sounds good. Okay, so I think it's the last session of the day. It is a little warm, so if anyone needs to go get water, no one falling asleep in virtual fencing. So I turn the floor over to you. We can start us. So.
Okay. Thanks for the introduction. Again, I am Brady. We'll just get rolling. Because I'll explain a little bit more about my thing there.
Yeah.
Is it on?
This is sorry. Great. I didn't, yeah. It worked. Oh, would you mind? So the thing, press something on the PowerPoint spot. Anywhere in the just there we go. So what we discovered with my section is whenever you touch anything on Zoom, it suddenly defaults towards Zoom.
Gotcha.
So we're good.
Perfect. Okay, here is a quick legislative primer. Washington State has two chambers, the House and the Senate. There are 49 legislative districts in our state. They operate on every 2 years, what we refer to as the biennium. Odd years are the big years. Those are the years that they take on the budgets as well as policies. And then in the even years, those are called kind of supplemental years where they might pass supplemental operating capital or transportation budgets. But they're shorter, and the intent of them is to clean up things from the previous year, like drafting errors or making tweaks to some legislation. But they don't do that anymore. They pretty much treat a short session like a long session in just a real condensed period of time. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. So in 2023, that's this last legislative session, and we began the year one of our biennium. The state runs on a different fiscal year. They run July 1 to June 30th. So all of the activities that they passed in 2023 respectively go into effect. Those budgets would go into effect on July 1, and their policy bills generally are going into effect around July 23rd if they follow the traditional 90 days. Legislation can have an emergency clause where they go into effect immediately upon the governor's signature. So in this past legislative session, they introduced 2,000 bills, and 974 of them made it to, or 974 then passed their respective chamber, and then 476 became law. So 974 bills got pretty close, but then it dwindles down, and the legislative process is intended to kill bills. It's not supposed to be easy to move bills through the legislative process. Bills will move through, they'll be introduced in one chamber or the other. Sometimes a bill is introduced in both, and they'll refer to those as companion bills. The language will look identical, but let's use that as an example. It gets introduced in the House, and it goes through a process. It might receive some changes, and then it goes through the Senate. It might receive it might have different changes maybe made in the Senate, then they flip. And that Senate bill goes through the House, and then that House bill goes through the Senate. And if both of those bills make it through, they've got some corrections to do to reconcile the differences between those two bills. So it can get really complicated, but the intent is to ensure that everything is very well thought out and debated in both of those two chambers. My role is as a lobbyist is to help them make decisions. So 2,000 bills get introduced. I obviously don't know all of those, but I know the field of bills that my clients are paying me to pay attention to. But legislators can't be familiar with that many bills either. They're churning through, they sit on their committees and they'll hear information about a particular bill, but to get to and listen to testimony, but the real education occurs in the one-on-one meetings and their conversations with lobbyists. And so I build relationships with them. I build trust with them. So when I come in and I explain the implications of that legislation, how it might impact my client or benefit my client, they believe me because we have a relationship and they're like, she knows her stuff. And that's how I lobby them, per se. So just quickly, these are the three budgets. Operating is the day-to-day stuff that the state does. So teachers, the operating budget pays for our teachers. The capital budget pays for projects. Much of the funding that you go after for your conservation work typically is funded through the capital budget. And then the transportation budget is pretty self-explanatory, pays for everything related to our transportation system, as well as fish barrier removals. So sometimes that gets mixed, they pay for, some of that gets paid through the capital budget as well.
That's good though.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Well, I just see the transportation is kind of weirdly called out. It seems like it has to go operating and capital.
Can you repeat the question since probably the people online didn't hear that?
Correct. The question is that transportation is called out specifically when it involves both capital and operating functions. While that is true, the transportation budget is where operating dollars go is only to the Department of Transportation and then only to transportation projects. So it's very rare, the capital budget is rarely ever paying for anything related to the transportation system. So the sidewalks are going to get paid for through the transportation budget. As and the ferries and the like. It has its own, it collects its own revenue sources, such, coming from the gas tax and then the federal funding we receive. So they concentrate all of that into its own budget, the transportation budget. Okay, so the 2023 legislative session, there were a few items that are at the forefront of debate in our local communities and what people are really struggling with. And that is housing, the housing shortage, the homeless population or the unhoused, depending on your vernacular, and behavioral health. And so there was a lot of debate and attention on those items. And when I say behavioral health, that captures a lot of things because could involve the drug possession law, if you are familiar with hearing about the Blake decision, as well as rebuilding our state hospital center, or state hospital facility. And as well as taking care of the opioid epidemic and ensuring that people have access to treatment and so forth. So it's a big bucket, but those were three items when the legislature went into session that they knew they had to tackle and make some real significant policy choices in order to resolve these issues. And we also saw, and all of those also, while they're policy, they're also budget. They needed to be, the housing crisis. They wanted to, there was over $1 billion identified in the overall almost $70 billion budget that the state identified in just the operating budget. 1 billion of that was on a variety of different housing programs and ways to increase that. This part, the next part is sometimes the next few bullets, I think, is what a lot of people enjoy hearing about, and that's the inside baseball sort of stuff. So our Governor Inslee, announced that he will not run for re-election in 2024. So what that does is, you know, if you remember the term, he's a lame duck. So we will see a lot of personnel moving on because they will know, you know, they might feel uncertain about serving in a future administration. So we already saw, we've already seen 2 of his top policy folks move to different jobs. So his legislative liaison, like his lobbyist, Drew Shirk, has now moved, and he's going to be the director of Department of Revenue. And then his top policy chief, Nick Struley, is moved, and he's going to be in the private sector and be a contract lobbyist such as myself. So those, and we'll likely see and hear of those changes for the next, year and a half.
Do they, what do they call it, like a cooling down? What's the cooling down period, like going from a position to like a lobbying position? Is that only for like legislators?
That only applies to
Okay.
legislators. Yeah. And in the House, the very final days of session, it was announced that House Republican leadership was going to change. So we've had Representative JT Wilcox as the minority leader with his deputy, Representative Joel Kretz. Those 2, that's his deputy minority leader, those 2 stepped down. Replacing them are 2 younger folks in the legislature, younger in like an actual age, and they're both seen as kind of moderate Republicans and come from the urban area, which is one of them is Representative Stokesbury. Drew Stokesbury is now the new minority leader, and which opened up his seat as the ranking member on House Appropriations. So we saw then Representative Corey take that prominent position. And then the Representative Steele became the deputy minority leader, and that opened up his seat as the ranking on the capital budget. And Representative Peter Abarno took that position. So some of those shiftings. And then the big news is in the Senate, where Senator Christine Rolfes, who is the chair of Ways and Means and is a powerhouse, like she is a phenomenal legislator. She has taken a position with Kitsap County as one of the 3 county commissioners. So that then opens, and she has when she announced her bid for that, she said, I'm not going to hold my Senate seat at the same time, because that is allowed in some counties. Snohomish County, for example, has 2 county commissioners who also serve in the House of Representatives. So she could do it, she's choosing not to do it. So that opens up her seat on a very powerful committee. And we expect her vice chair, Senator Jean Robinson, to take that seat, to take the chairmanship. She was a vice chair in the House as well. And the rumor is that Senator Joe Wynn will be her vice chair on that committee. So then we are anticipating a lot of trickle down effect with the upcoming 2024 election. So in 2024, the entire House of Representatives is up for re-election, or is up for bid, and half of the Senate is up. And so we've got these 4 statewide seats. These aren't all of the statewide seats. These are just the ones that legislative members have put their names in for. So the governor the race is between likely, like for now, is our Attorney General Bob Ferguson, are the Commissioner of Public Lands Hillary Franz, and Senator Mark Mullet. All have announced bids, and then there's other folks in the race too, but their names aren't as prominent. So that then opens up the Attorney General seat, and Senator Manka Dhingra has announced her bid for that seat. She plays a pretty significant role in the behavioral health space. So that's a potential loss. So Mark Mullet would be the loss in the Senate side. He's considered a moderate, and a lot of more progressive Democrats tend to get really angry with him because he's sometimes a no-go on like taxes, for example, because he's a business, he owns and operates his own businesses. So a lot of people see him as standing in the way of pretty progressive agendas. So now going back to the Attorney General, then you've got Munkadingra. There's a rumor that our federal prosecutor, Nick Brown, he had served in the Inslee administration as well. He's an attorney. He also was on Survivor, and everybody's expecting him to, but that he will announce at some point, but he has to step down from his federal position before he can announce. Insurance commissioner, you're like, why should bring up insurance commissioner? Well, that's Patty Cooter. Senator Patty Cooter is put her name in for this office, and I expect other legislators might as well. So, and then finally, Commissioner of Public Lands. There are 3 folks who are rumored to be considering this post, and that is King County Council member Dave Upthegrove. He served in the legislature as well prior to becoming going to the King County Council. Senator Vandeweghe, who has been a strong champion of conservation districts, and Representative Drew McEwen. Representative Drew McEwen, who's a Republican, people are anticipating them. I'm quite certain that I know that Senator Vandeweghe will be announcing, he's for certain, and the other 2 are still a little, we just expect.
That's me. So why should you care about all this? That's the question I'm gonna kind of put to your mind for a second. Because the smallest part of a legislator's job is voting. By the time something gets to the floor of the House or the Senate in Washington State, they already know the outcome. The leadership right now, it's the Democratic Party in the House and the Senate, is not going to let something get voted on and fail. That happened once this year, and that was like, what? How long has it been since you've seen something on the floor fail?
Forever.
Yeah. So what you see how many of you actually have turned on TVW and actually like? How many of you know what TVW
I don't
is?
really want to put my hand up.
Yeah, you shouldn't. So TVW, I guess let's start there, is Washington State's public access network, C-SPAN for Washington State. It's available online. It's very, very awesome. A lot of states don't have wall-to-wall coverage, but every committee meeting, every proceeding that they have, a lot of the Supreme Court, actually all the Supreme Court stuff. And anything you want to know about the state government is usually found on TVW, and it's available online. So that's how you can access everything, and that's how you watch it all. So what you see on TVW is kind of the smallest part of their job. They're on the floor, they talk, and then they vote, and they know what the outcome is going to be. This is kind of a list of everything else that they can do. This is about a third of what I could think of in 5 minutes. Of interest to conservation districts is member requesting funding. Whitman Conservation District submitted a funding request and had Senator Schessler from their district help them secure $961,000 for fire recovery post Malden fire that hadn't been fulfilled by other needs. That's something that you can get a legislator to help you with. Support letters, drawing attention, directing funding to conservation districts when they're in meetings, budget meetings, and they're like, well, should ecology, WSDA, DNR, Conservation Commission get funding? Be like, let's put it that way. So, you know, not just asking them to vote for things, but being aware that there's a lot that legislators can do for you. So it's just have that in the back of your mind. So legislative outreach is just kind of start with getting to know your legislators. How many of you know who your legislators are? Okay. There is a page on the legislative website, leg.wa.gov. You can find your legislators, put in your address and pull up your people, and you can send them an email in the next 5 minutes. It's very easy to get in touch. And these are part-time legislators. They have jobs and lives outside of being in Olympia. So they have legislative assistants who will also talk to you. And there's a whole lot of information about understanding the process, the committee structure. If there's information you don't know how to find, I spent the last 10 years working with all this stuff. I could probably take my phone and call a legislator in the next 2 minutes with about 4 clicks of a button on my phone. So if you can't find it, it's there. It might be hidden, it might be tucked away somewhere, but it's, as WACD, we want to make sure you have access to your legislators. And I think be the expert, that's in there as you are the ones that are the conservation district experts. You can talk on project tours or in public meetings about the projects that you do, the programs that you're a part of, the funding that goes through your office. You guys have things to talk about. You know, you don't have to be the expert on everything, but someone who's been working on salmon riparian funding or VSP or education, you know, salmon in the classroom, you're the local expert. Be willing to share that information if and when you're able to. So I don't know if everyone in the back can read this. What's the most dangerous place in Washington, D.C.? Between Chuck Schumer and a camera. That's an actual quote, pretty sure it came from Harry Reid. This is about 10 years old at this point. But I included that as a way to indicate legislators like to be seen. They like to be seen doing good things and be seen by a lot of people. If you are having project tours, if you're having annual meetings and you know more than 5 people are going to show up, you should invite your legislator. If less than 5 people are going to show up, you probably should invite your legislator. You'll have more time to talk to them. That was supposed to be funny. So they like to be seen. Election, we've already talked about, you know, how many people are going to be running for different offices. Your local legislators would love to be seen with the good things that conservation districts do. If you're releasing salmon into the Tri-Cities, invite your legislators. There was many articles, many videos about that, so that was front of my mind. If you're having an environment, you know, there's environthon competitions. Politicians like to kiss babies. I mean, they're not actually babies, and I don't think kissing is probably going to happen much anymore. But just be aware that there's opportunities if you're having people around. Legislators would like to be there, and that means you have time to talk to them. Other thing to be aware of, interim meetings. That's meetings that don't happen in the 15 minutes you get during Olympia. Is a lot better than 15 minutes in Olympia. Because you can call a legislator and have coffee with them for 2 hours. If you have that sort of relationship, when you're in Olympia, you get 15 minutes. You can't talk about a lot in 15 minutes. But if you can have coffee with them once or twice in the interim, have them out for, you know, show them what your barn, show them your latest conservation project. What's the newest BMP you install?
They also may host town halls.
Yeah.
And they encourage you to attend town halls. Just, you know, and you don't always need an ask. You just be there, you know, attend just to share some thoughts on your work and take that opportunity to invite them publicly to participate in your activity or your work.
And finally, be in it for the long haul. Don't expect something to happen immediately. There's about 150,000 people per legislative district, give or take. Might be a little bit higher at this point. That might have been 60. 160,000 people in the legislative district. There's 49 legislative districts. You're having to be one voice of 160,000. So it's not going to be the first conversation you have, maybe the second or the third, where they're actually going to remember your name, or maybe at least recognize you. I'm with the conservation district. You don't know when you shouldn't know when you start, reaching out what you want from that person, because you're not going to know. There might be 10 years down the road, you've had 3 conversations in 10 years with that person, and that suddenly you need a legislator. How many of you have heard about the quote, the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago? Same thing. The best time to start a relationship with your legislator was 30 years ago. So, all right. There's a couple of conservation district briefings on the commission website, how to stay out of trouble. Oh, yes, sorry, question in the back.
Sorry, I keep interrupting. On that previous topic, I think we get a lot of actually working in a regional context where it's not single legislator.
Yeah.
Just curious, like, probably not time to be for 2 hours. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
So the question was asked, when you're working on a regional basis, or maybe more specific to some of you, you have many legislative districts that come into your conservation district service area. How do you coordinate? How do you meet with folks? How do you prioritize and triage when you have, King County has 47 legislators, give or take? Anyway.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes, in the county, the center
Yeah.
area, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but it's.
Yeah, so King County, I don't know how they do it, but you should start with the ones that are on the ag and natural resource or environment committees. They're the ones that probably care more about this issue. Legislators get assigned to things to serve on committees that they know about. If you reach out to a legislator and they don't.
And fiscal committees.
Thank you, yes, and fiscal committees, the people who talk about budgets. If you want money, they're the people to talk to.
So in the House, there are 3 budget committees, 4. There is appropriations, that's spending the money. There's finance, which is about taxes, the revenue that comes in. There's the capital budget, which is strictly focused on capital, and then the transportation budget. In the Senate, it's a bit easier. It's Ways and Means does what the House has 3 committees for. They do appropriations, they do capital, and they do the finance, all in Ways and Means. And then they have a transportation committee. So just two committees there. I think there's 30 people on Ways and Means, so chances are you'll probably have a member on Ways and Means. Appropriations is a big committee as well. So that's I think a good like a first, like how to pare it down into focus is policy and budget.
And I guess a good rule of thumb, if you email a legislator and they respond, you can probably follow up with them with additional conversations. Yes, there was another question.
Yeah, you were talking about the idea of establishing relationships with, because it's every 2 years, right? The new legislators are being elected.
Yep.
How do you kind of like stay on that kind of thing? Look like establishing a relationship with them by the time you actually know them with the new person in that position.
Well, I think it's a cycle, right? There's some people who have been there for 20 years. So I don't think you wage your bets on, I don't think they're going to be there very long. You just have to get back on the hamster wheel and do it all again. I think most members have the intent of sticking around for a little while, so it's never going to be
Is there
at your
a
disadvantage.
No.
Yeah, but it is, yeah, like this past session, there were 23 new members, I think it's just the House, that began, and when you counted how many never served in Olympia because of COVID, the number was even greater than that. It was pretty wild. So we had as a lobbyist, like there were a lot of people, you know, that I had only been talking to over Zoom. And so you kind of have to rebuild those relationships or remind them, like, you know, like I had hair back then, you know. So it's a constant game. But that's what it is.
And over time, you'll figure out pretty quickly which legislators will like to talk to you. In Eastern Washington, you've got a lot more folks who have been in the ag industry or working at the natural resource side. Western Washington's a little bit different. I mean, as long as you can find someone within your 3-person delegation to really connect with, that's a good win. That's awesome.
I find too, sharing your annual report with them with an invitation to come out to something, or if you're interested in any of this work, let me know and I can, give you more insights or give you more information. But that's a great tool to like not only educate them because they're learning about the district, but then you can, parlay it into an invite.
So there's some information on the commission. If you have to report lobbying activity, just make sure you're staying out of legal trouble. Trust me, the PDC is not someone you want to get to know very quickly. Public Disclosure Commission, PDC, is the state agency that regulates reporting, spending of money, election stuff.
Okay. So there's different ways to go about things. There is.
Brynn, before you jump into that, back on the previous slide, can you kind of just maybe point to a couple spots that applies? That's not legislative tours. That's like,
You want to jump
is
ahead?
that part of your 15 minutes?
No, so. If you go over a certain threshold of hours talking to legislators, you could trigger the need to file yourself and identify yourself as a lobbyist. So I do this for a job, so clearly I'm registered, but some people who don't do it as a job, but if they're doing it enough or doing it a lot, they need to be registered with the PDC.
And there's a list of cans and can.
Yeah, we'll probably get to that. And all, but the lobbying is speaking to legislation specifically, like to say, that's a good bill, vote yes, that's a bad bill, vote no. That's a real like nitty gritty definition of it, but that's essentially it. If you're just educating them, you can do that all day long, and you can be educating them that leads them down a path of being supportive of something or not being supportive of something, but you're not directly saying. You're going to be talking about, this funding was received through the capital budget. It was from the floodplains by design program. And we worked with these partners and we were able to achieve this and it's had these results. That's just giving them information about a project, not lobbying. So yeah, and that's probably the key word, that you're trying to influence their decision. But when you're just telling them about the benefits of things, that's totally within the realm of, that's not reportable, let's say. And I would say, even if you are talking about legislation, if you're permitted to do that, you probably aren't going to trigger, I think it's 10 hours or something.
Yeah, it's every quarter, right?
Well, yeah, you're filing every quarter, but I think when you think about it, it's over a period of time. So if you're really working an issue and you go to dozens and dozens of 15-minute meetings talking to folks, then yeah, you might trigger it. But I think your best bet is just to steer clear sometimes of that. Because for example, like the audit, for example, they have 20,000 members in Washington state. They will send out action alerts telling their members to say, contact your legislators and tell them to vote yes on this or vote no on this. You guys don't operate like that. You're not grassroots in that way of motivating and impacting the passage or defeat of legislation. And then I'm kind of in the realm of the direct lobbying.
It's a CDs can.
Yeah, CDs can. So this is educate, meet with non-legislative groups. You can host or attend lunches, breakfasts, legislative wrap-ups, sessions like this. For example, I just did I have another client here in Leavenworth. So earlier today, I facilitated a legislative panel. So the legislators and people were talking, like that isn't considered lobbying. Sponsor a candidates forum, but you can't endorse. So you could have a discussion with them and hear where they stand on things, but you're not going to give them a grade or endorse, say that this conservation district endorses this candidate. Informing folks, that's kind of where I'm talking about sending your annual report. You can write letters, but it can't include the call to action. And answer fully and directly if asked about a specific bill by an elected representative or their staff. And of course, this is when you are a conservation district employee and on your own time. If you are if you are a district employee, when you are on your own time, you can do anything. You just can't be representing the conservation district in your opinion, and make that clear to them. Say, okay, well, me personally, I would say blah, 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 but that is not the position of my employer. CDs cannot participate or intervene directly or indirectly in any political campaign. That's pretty, again, you on your own time, most definitely as an individual. Support, oppose, or endorse candidates, asking them to vote for or against a bill, and sending a letter, and asking for a veto. And now we're at questions. There's gotta be some.
And those, I mean, for those of you who don't spend a lot of time working with me or getting emails from me, the stuff that Brynn was talking about that you can't do, you can't ask them to vote yes or no on something. I can do that. She can do that on WACD's behalf. There's a role that the association can play, and there's a role that our lobbyists can play that's different from conservation districts. You all are government entities. You operate under RCW 9808. I'm a 501c6 nonprofit. WACD is the same type of nonprofit like the NFL. We can do anything as long as we can justify it as advocating and advancing the needs of our membership. We can hire a lobbyist. We can give political contributions. We haven't. So just that. Okay, I got 5-6 questions after that. Awesome. So who wants to go first? All right, David, and then Kim, if that's okay.
So Brynn, I'm not familiar. I mean, I'm very familiar with what lobbyists is. Like, so do lobbyists have many clients?
So the question was asked.
Yeah, the question is, do lobbyists have many clients? So there's two kind of types. There's in-house people. So Ryan could be considered like an in-house lobbying, but he has other functions. But there's, but Microsoft has an in-house government relations team, and then Microsoft hires contract lobbyists as well, because the in-house folks are usually have more company responsibilities, where my focus is strictly on the legislators and ensuring I have access to the right people for my clients. So I have in the natural resource space, I represent WACD, I represent the Audubon, I represent regional fishery enhancement groups, and the Washington Association of Land Trusts. And then I have a healthcare portfolio, so I represent all of the local public health officials in Washington State. And then I also represent the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. And then I have some business clients. I have Amazon Web Services, Bank of America, Special Olympics Washington, City of Woodinville. So, yeah, so that diversity allows me to engage in more relationships, because I'm covering so many different committees. So I get to know more people. Some people only focus on, might be just natural resource lobbyists. Their tribes usually have a contract lobbyist, and they are strictly focused that that's their only client are the tribes. And then I also, this is one of my favorite jokes, that lobbyists generally, they are either attorneys, they've gone to law school and they're working in advocacy. So I like to say like half are attorneys and the other half are Washington State Cougars. So whatever dynamic exists in Pullman, they produce a lot of lobbyists. So it's funny. So I do not have a law degree. I began my career I studied political science, and my intent was to go to law school, but I found a path through with my political science degree. I started as a long-range planner in Pierce County, and I was brought in to testify on bills down in Olympia, as a subject matter expert. And so I would go down and, I was working with Pierce County's government relations office, and a position opened up, and I was like, that seems like the next step in my career. And so I went there and I started, that's how I got my feet wet in true government relations work at the state level. And then I went out on my own, as a contractor about 10 years ago.
And you were a Peace Corps volunteer.
And I was a Peace Corps, yeah, I was a Peace Corps volunteer.
Yeah,
Yeah, so this morning you talked about the CTA and how it almost made it across the finish line and how we could have just kind of helped push it across. I mean, I guess what I'm interested most is hearing that the CTA is like the most, it's our implementation grant. We should all really get behind this to really push it for next legislative session start now. What at the 11th hour like that, what can you do, you know, when session is going and, you know, I mean, giving us those action points that are effective are really helpful. Like, okay, female, well, at this point is the best, you know, option. Yeah.
So the budget is very challenging to work. It's not traditional like a policy bill where it's narrow, it's focused, there's a hearing specifically on it. It's, you know, let's say it's only one subject. And the budget obviously contains everything, you know, especially the operating budget specifically. And that's where we were seeking the CTA was out of the operating, right?
yeah.
Okay. So I was like, wait, is that right? So the beginning of the legislative session opens with policy bills because there are, I didn't get into this, but the legislative process, they define it with cutoff dates. And so there's a so bills can get introduced. Legislators can introduce as many bills as they want, whether or not they're going to go anywhere or not. And they have until a specific date to be heard in that committee. And then once it makes it out of that committee, if it has any fiscal impact, there's another cutoff that the bill needs to make it through a fiscal committee. So policy bills, if it costs any money, it has to go through at least 2 steps, sometimes 3. And then if it doesn't make it past that fiscal cutoff, then it dies. But then if it does, then it goes to 4 and then it swaps and it follows that same process in the other thing. Meanwhile, the budget writers are in dark closed rooms working the budget and waiting in a sense for these policy bills that cost money, waiting for those because those are going to impact what their budget is. They're waiting for a revenue forecast to understand how much money they can plan for. And they're just culling through the budget. And so they first look at the governor's budget. He produces one. I jokingly call it a unicorn because he doesn't have to balance his budget. So he can produce any budget. And so his can be as rosy as he wants it to be. And so the legislature starts looking through like, well, what do we like out of his budget? But like I said, all of that's going on behind the scenes. So me as a lobbyist, I'm tilting windmills in a lot of sense because I'm just talking to people about budget stuff, but that budget isn't out there. Like if there's nothing physical for me to be pointing to, I'm just talking about CTA, how important it is, and so forth. Then there's a process for that members can make specific requests of the fiscal committees for specific things, and they'll prioritize what things that they have. And some of them are discrete, like a local community project. Other times it just could be, you know, like something, it could be for CTA. And so, and then I'm working with a member on filling out a lot of those forms because conservation districts are funded by so much. That's sometimes hard to do to get them to focus like, no, we need 10 things funded, you know, not just CTA, we need all these other things. So it gets confusing. on what the priority is, and that's just the beast. That is just the beast that we have, because you're being the, the Conservation Commission has so many different accounts. So you do your best in the very first few weeks to become a member's priority. Well, you're doing it in the interim, because that's what we should be doing it in the interim. And then I work really closely with these legislators where I'm just talking about something that's not really there yet. And then it goes, and then once that deadline is to have those member requests in, it's silent. Then you don't talk about budgets anymore. And then you just wait and you wait and you wait until they produce, the House will produce a budget and the Senate will produce a budget. And then you wait and see, where did I fall? And so as I aim to be in at least one budget. Get me in at least one budget, and then we can advocate to the other chamber to maintain the level that's in the other budget. If it's in both budgets, then you're like, okay, this is going to get funded. Now we just need to hone in on what that dollar amount was. The CTA went sideways because the Senate put $10 million in CTA and the House put in $1 million. So we're like, okay, good. The CTA is in there, and the confusion came on the Senate side because while the 10 million was there, we felt secure that it was there. So we focused on the House, which is what you'd want to do for them to come meet in the middle. And ultimately it was confusion on the person who was the senator who was helping us thought that it was in because it was in their budget. But then when the budget writers went to negotiate with the House, they settled with the House amount because that senator assumed the 10 million was there, because it was. So it just was like, it's a dynamic that's really, really, really hard to control and really hard to affect. That's why it's really important to do the stuff in the interim, so everybody's just much clearer on what the ask is. Because I don't remember if it was on the slide. We may have taken it out, but the cardinal rule of lobbying is consistent messaging, consistency. Because if you give them an excuse to get confused, they'll take it. They will take it hands down. So we all need to be on the same page and talking about things. So it's repetitive. And they don't. There's no confusion on our part. Then that means there's going to be less confusion there because there's enough to get confused about already.
If it helps, Kim, how I always think about the legislative process is like the old stock exchange. You have 500 people in a room trying to shout at each other. We're one of those 500 people, and we don't know until the end of the day whether or not our orders have been heard or not. And there's 499 other people trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot the last part of that. So the House produces their budget, the Senate produces theirs. And so everybody looks at those budgets, and then you just go at it, talking to everybody about which budget you like more, and you guys write letters, and we articulate all of that, and then it goes silent again. And then you don't see, so they go into conference to reconcile those differences, and you don't see that budget until the very last day. And so there's always a complaint about the transparency of the budget, but that is just how it happens. They aren't going to change it, but waiting for that. So there's nothing you can do when that final budget came out. So we were affecting the process when you were supposed to, but then when that budget came out at the end of the day, it just wasn't there. And I got an apology, and it's just like, we'll see what we can do in the supplemental, and it's like, okay. So.
Other questions? Oh, in the back.
I think I had the maybe wrong impression that often what you want to do to get into budget is start with the governor's budget and then try to make sure it all gets sort of that based into the other two.
That is a strategy. That can work, but a lot of legislators, like when I go in and I'm like, it's in the governor's budget, the reply is often everything's in the governor's budget. So getting in there is good because that shows the governor's not going to veto it. He's supportive of it. So there's benefits to it. I just, the legislature controls the purse string. So that's where I focus. I'm like, I could work the governor's office and maybe I should, but I think my time is better spent on the legislative side.
Dana?
Brynn, I think to that regard, when we went in, we met with Speaker Lori Jenkins. Lori had said, if it's in the governor, before she got elected, she's like, if it's in the governor's budget, it's good. But then once she became Speaker of the House, she was like, oh, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, even if that's what we're getting back from our legislative body, that's really important to see.
Yeah.
So yes, no.
Yeah.
For those who weren't able to hear, Dana Coggin, District Executive Director at the Pierce Conservation District, shared that when they went in and met with the Speaker of the House, who is the top dog, head cheese, she said, it doesn't matter. So, just for the folks online who probably can't hear you. Doug?
The only things I noticed is, I'm not sure what the percentage is, I know people talking about the actual legislature, the part of the staff. Which isn't quite as good, but it's really pretty good, it's a lot of the gatekeepers. They're the ones that filter like it's to the legislature.
Yeah, so the role of the, we're talking about legislative assistants and staff. A lot there, legislative staff sometimes are policy staff for the legislator, and sometimes they're just schedulers. But it's in your best interest to treat them all the same and treat them all like they're the number two, because ultimately they are the gatekeeper, is the prime, is the role that they have. But some of them do play a policy role and can be just as effective, because they can, if they care about it, they're more likely to rise things up for their boss. So the legislative assistants are super, super critical. And also, with these legislative tours, you need to be letting Ryan know so then he can let me know, because sometimes I'm like, oh, that would be a good one for me to be at, so I can help with this particular way, because I can make those asks, right? I can be the more direct person. So you give the information and then I can be there poking them on what I want them to do on your behalf. So please, and let them know. And then secondly, what I also can do is I know what policy staff that maybe might be interested. So every committee has policy staff that, they're writing the bill reports on everything. And then on the and over in those fiscal committees, they have subject areas, like this guy Jed, he does all the natural resource stuff in the Senate. So if I know of something going on, and if I think it's like, I'm like gonna be, obviously every tour is cool, but let's say it's really, really cool, I'll be like, okay, I'll reach out to some staff on committees. And then every committee also has caucus staff. So the House Democrats have someone, and the Democrats have somebody, and the Republicans have somebody who's observing the bills with a political lens. So the policy staff are nonpartisan. They don't give an opinion. They just report on what the bill is doing. But that caucus staff, they go in when the Republicans are discussing something and the Democrats are discussing something, they'll report like, hey, the line we need to toe is to oppose this, or we should support it, or they made these changes we requested these changes, they made those changes, so now we're good with the bill. So those folks are good to have come out as well. So, but I know these things. So when you're doing those tours, like that's why you should be looping us in, because I could possibly make it a little more effective, I guess.
Any other questions? I think we're getting close on time.
4 minutes.
Does this feel a little less scary and intimidating? A little less daunting? Oh, yeah, Jen.
Yeah, I guess it's more of a thank you and a comment that these types of conversations at a time are really helpful, but also when we are going into legislative days and having that time ahead of time and just assuming maybe that none of us know anything is very helpful too. Because it is intimidating to go and, do this stuff, even if you've been doing it for a decade. And so I guess I would just encourage you, don't ever feel like you're gonna offend us by providing templates, providing resources, walking us through kind of a recipe card, or it's really telling us what we need to be doing, because that is super, super helpful. So thank you for making yourself available and for doing those things for us.
I'm just gonna say that, so Better Ground, we all meet every Friday, all the outreach staff, and we put together like this, really good looking one pager. This many acres planted, this many volunteers. So, I mean, if people don't have that, we should make sure every district has that, so they can input their efforts.
And, at your district, there might be a supervisor or a particular staff person or the district manager who is the designated legislative person. I know most of you didn't get into your jobs to work with legislators. Some of you might, I don't know. I did. But so just make sure that your district is talking with one voice when you're able to do that. As Brynn said, it's the consistency. Now you can have someone who has, relationships with all of your supervisors, or as a former supervisor themselves, anyone from UCD here? Yeah,
There's a couple online.
okay, yeah, the newest member of Congress from Washington State was a Underwood Conservation District Supervisor until December. So, yeah, she might have relationships with all the other supervisors at UCD. But at your district, just if there's someone who wants to do it, let them. If you're the one who kind of gets pushed into that role, it's okay to be scared. The legislators meet with people who can be intimidating or be intimidated by, like they're used to that. Just as long as you're passionate about what you believe in and you don't lie to them, you can usually go a long way with those two things. So, any final thoughts before we thank you? Oh, is there a question in the chat?
Just to thank you very much.
Okay. Any final thoughts, Brynn?
No, I mean, I was, like I said, at that legislative panel I was on, a question came up like that, how do I keep you engaged? And I always feel like a newbie at it or something. And so, Senator Robinson replied, she's just like, I'm sorry, I hate that you're intimidated, because we're people just like you, and they aren't, they are. They are serving, they are a public servant, they are serving for a reason, and it is to serve their constituents. And if you are one, and if you're talking to them, it's because you are one. And I'm not saying take this attitude, but just repeat in your head, like, I'm the constituent, they're working for me, right? Like, you're not gonna boss them around, but that is the role. They want to hear from their constituents, so they are appropriately representing them. And so just, keep that in your head. Like, I'm the one who's in charge here. I'm the one who votes. So, and that's what they want, votes.
So thank you, everyone.